The biting wind was a razor against Ilara Vance's chapped lips, each gust a cruel reminder of her dwindling strength. For 3 days, the jagged canyons and sun-baked flats had been her only companions, the silence broken only by the ragged drawl of her own breath and the distant, imagined baying of hounds. Her ankle throbbed with a venomous heat where she'd wrenched it scrambling down a rockslide, the torn fabric of her dress caked with dust and dried blood. Thirst was a living thing in her throat, a clawing beast. When the faint scent of wood smoke reached her, it was less a comfort than a premonition. Smoke meant people, and people meant danger. But her body, a traitor to her will, stumbled towards it, towards the flicker of light that pricked the deepening twilight. It was a small, rough-hewn cabin, almost swallowed by the overhang of a colossal red rock formation. A lone horse, lean and dark as shadowed iron, stood tethered near a dying fire. And then she saw him. The man rose from a crouch beside the flames, a silhouette against the embers, tall and broad-shouldered. A rifle rested easy in the crook of his arm. A cowboy, weathered as the land itself. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was it. The end of her desperate flight. Bounty hunters, men like him, were relentless. He would see the fear in her eyes, the hunted look, the price on her head. He would kill her. She expected it, braced for the cold judgment, the swift violence. She sank to her knees, not in supplication, but in sheer, bone-deep exhaustion, the fight draining out of her like water from a cracked canteen. His boots crunched on the gravel as he approached. She closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. The silence stretched, taut and terrible. She heard him stop, felt his presence looming over her. Then, a voice, low and rough like stones grinding together. "You're a long way from anywhere," not the bark of an accuser, but a flat statement. Ilara forced her eyes open. He was closer now, his face shadowed by the brim of a worn hat, but she could see the lines etched around his eyes, the grim set of his mouth. He wasn't young. He nudged a canteen towards her with the toe of his boot. Water. She stared at it, then at him, suspicion warring with a desperate craving in her throat. He made no move, just watched. Slowly, trembling, she reached for it, her fingers fumbling with the cap. The water was cool, divine, a shock to her system. She drank too fast, coughed, then drank again, more carefully. He waited. When she was done, he gestured with his chin towards her injured ankle, swollen and discolored. "That looks bad," he crouched, not threateningly, but with a practical air. Before she could protest, he was examining it, his touch surprisingly gentle for such a rough-looking man. "Sprained." "Maybe fractured." He looked up, his gaze unreadable in the fading light. "Can't leave you out here like this." He rose, turned back to the fire, and picked up a water skin and a strip of clean-looking cloth she hadn't noticed before. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask why she was alone and injured in the wilderness. He didn't draw his sidearm. He simply knelt again, soaked the cloth, and began to clean the grime from her wound. Ilara watched, stunned into silence. Every instinct screamed trap, yet his actions were the antithesis of her terror-filled expectations. He was helping her. This stranger, this cowboy she was certain would be her executioner, was tending to her hurts with a quiet efficiency that was more disarming than any threat. The pain of his ministration was sharp, but it was the unexpected kindness that made her breath catch, that brought fresh tears to her eyes, tears of confusion and a terrifying, fragile flicker of something she hadn't dared feel for days, hope. The cowboy, Silas Kane he'd eventually called himself in that same laconic drawl, didn't press her for answers that first night. He'd fashioned a crude but effective splint for her ankle, shared his meager meal of jerky and hardtack, and then gestured to a bedroll near the fire. "Rest. We'll talk when the sun's up." Ilara had barely slept, her mind a whirlwind of fear and cautious relief. Every creak of the cabin's old timbers, every sigh of the wind outside, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. She watched Silas as he sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle, his movements economical and precise. He seemed a man carved from the very rock and dust of the unforgiving land, self-contained and solitary. Was he a bounty hunter playing a long game? Testing her? Or was he something else entirely? The thought that he might simply be a decent man felt too outlandish, a luxury she couldn't afford. Morning brought a merciless clarity to the landscape and to her situation. Silas was already up, the scent of coffee, real coffee, a startling aroma in the desolate air. He handed her a tin cup, the warmth seeping into her cold hands. "Marshall Thorne," he said, "not a question, but a statement. He the one you're running from?" Ilara flinched, her gaze snapping to his. How could he know? Thorne was the architect of her misery, the man who'd twisted her loyalty into a noose, branding her a traitor and thief when she'd refused to be complicit in his corruption back in Redemption Creek. Silas merely sipped his coffee, his eyes on the distant horizon. Word travels, even out here. Description matches. Young woman, dark hair, wanted for theft and other matters. His gaze returned to her, steady and unblinking. Question is, did you do it? Ilara's throat tightened. The truth was a dangerous weapon, one that could easily be turned against her. But looking into his weathered face, seeing not accusation but a kind of weary understanding, a sliver of her carefully constructed defenses crumbled. Not the way he tells it, she whispered, her voice hoarse. He wanted me to help him defraud the settlement. Divert funds meant for the new irrigation project. When I refused, when I threatened to expose him, he framed me. A humorless smile touched Silas's lips. Thorne always did have a knack for making things stick to other folks. He paused, then added, he's also got a reputation for not giving up. The implication hung heavy in the air. He knew who Thorne was. This wasn't an accidental encounter. Had he been looking for her? Or was this his territory, and she'd simply stumbled into it? Why are you helping me? She finally asked, the question raw with suspicion. Silas finished his coffee, then rose and tossed the dregs into the dirt. Maybe I don't like Thorne much myself. Maybe I reckon a body deserves a fair chance, not a bullet in the back. He looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Or maybe I'm just tired of this damn silence. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. His actions, his continued presence, the fact he hadn't tied her up or ridden off to collect a reward, spoke volumes. He was offering a lifeline, however frayed and uncertain. The decision to trust, even partially, felt like stepping off a cliff in the dark. But the alternative, surrendering to Thorne's men, or dying alone in the wilderness, was a certainty she couldn't face. Days bled into a week under the watchful gaze of Silas Kane. Ilara's ankle slowly began to mend, the sharp, insistent pain dulling to a persistent ache. She observed Silas, his quiet rhythms a counterpoint to the turmoil within her. He was a man of few words, but his actions were a language she slowly began to understand. He showed her how to set snares for rabbits, his large hands surprisingly deft. He taught her which desert plants were edible, which could offer moisture, and which were best left untouched. There was a patience to him, a deep-seated knowledge of the land that seemed almost instinctual. One afternoon, while Silas was out checking his perimeter, a habit that kept Ilara on edge, wondering if he was expecting company or merely cautious, a pair of coyotes, gaunt and bold, ventured too close to the cabin. Ilara, propped against the cabin wall with a sturdy branch Silas had fashioned into a crutch, felt a surge of primal fear. She had no weapon, save for the heavy skillet by the cold hearth. As one of the animals, mangier than its companion, began to sniff towards their meager supplies, an instinct she didn't know she possessed took over. She grabbed the skillet, banging it loudly against a rock, shouting with a ferocity that surprised even herself. The coyotes, startled, yelped and darted away into the scrub. When Silas returned, he found her heart still pounding, the skillet clutched in her hand. He surveyed the scene, noted the disturbed earth where the coyotes had been, then looked at her. A rare, almost imperceptible quirk of his lips might have been a smile. Good instincts, he said, and the simple praise warmed her more than the midday sun. That evening, as the desert stars blazed with an impossible brilliance, Ilara offered him more of her story. She spoke of Redemption Creek, of her work as a clerk for the town council, her initial admiration for Marshall Thorne, the slow, dawning realization of his greed, and the desperate gamble she'd taken to acquire the ledger that proved his crimes, the ledger now sewn into the hem of her tattered dress. Silas listened, his expression unchanging, occasionally poking the fire with a stick, sending showers of sparks into the darkness. When she finished, the silence returned, but it felt different, less strained. "Thorn won't stop until he gets that ledger back, or puts you in the ground," he said finally. "He's got men out. Saw tracks a few miles north yesterday." Fresh Ilara's blood ran cold. "We have to move." Silas nodded. "Staying here's a death sentence, for both of us now." He looked at her directly. "I know a place. Hard to reach, but safer than this. It's a long ride. You up for it?" The question wasn't just about her physical ability, but her willingness to place her fate entirely in his hands. He was offering not just escape, but his continued protection, his companionship. The alternative was to strike out on her own again, a prospect that now seemed utterly terrifying. "Yes," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "I'm up for it." He gave a curt nod, then rose. "Get some sleep." "We leave at first light." As Ilara settled into her bedroll, a profound shift occurred within her. The cowboy who should have been her end was now her only hope, a reluctant guardian angel in worn leather and dust. The seeds of trust, planted in desperation, were tentatively taking root in the barren soil of her fear. The dawn broke cold and grey, the sun a pale disk behind a veil of high clouds. Silas had their few belongings packed with an almost military precision: bedrolls, a small sack of provisions, 2 water skins, his rifle in its scabbard, and a Colt Peacemaker which he now strapped around his own waist. He offered Ilara a smaller, older revolver, its metal worn smooth with age. "Know how to use one of these?" he asked, his tone matter-of-fact. Ilara shook her head, her eyes wide as she stared at the weapon. It felt alien and heavy in her hand. "Point, squeeze. Try not to shoot your own foot, or mine," he said, without a hint of humor, though a ghost of it might have flickered in his eyes. He showed her how to load it, how to aim, his large hands briefly covering hers. His touch was impersonal, instructive, yet it sent a strange current through her. The journey began. Silas set a relentless pace, his dark horse, aptly named Shadow, moving with a steady, ground-eating gait. Ilara rode a gentler mare, Scout, that Silas had apparently kept hidden in a small, concealed box canyon. Her ankle, though still tender, held up surprisingly well, wrapped tightly as it was. The landscape shifted from broken canyons to vast, rolling plains of sun-scorched grass, then to foothills that climbed towards distant, purple-hued mountains. The silence between them was companionable now, interspersed with Silas's terse observations about the land, the weather, or signs of animal life. He taught her to read the terrain, to look for the subtle indicators of water, the faint traces of game trails. He spoke of the Apache who had once roamed these lands, their resilience and their tragic fate, his voice holding a note of respect that surprised her. Ilara, in turn, found herself speaking of books she had read, of the life she had once imagined for herself before Thorn had shattered it. She spoke of her parents, lost to fever when she was young, and the quiet ambition that had driven her to Redemption Creek. One evening, huddled around a small, smokeless fire in the lee of a rock formation, she asked him, "Why do you live out here, Silas?" "Alone." He stared into the flames for a long moment, his face etched with shadows. "Some things, you can't outrun them in towns," he said finally, his voice softer than usual. "Out here, it's just you and what you've done. Or what's been done to you." He didn't elaborate, and Ilara didn't press. She understood the need for guarded spaces, for wounds left undisturbed. But his words resonated, hinting at a past that mirrored her own in its pain, if not its particulars. The journey was a crucible, stripping away pretense, forcing them to rely on one another. When a sudden desert thunderstorm erupted, transforming dry arroyos into raging torrents, it was Silas's quick thinking that got them to high ground. When Ilara's mare stumbled, threatening to send her tumbling into a ravine, it was Silas's strong arm that hauled her back to safety. And when Silas, feverish from a scratch that had turned septic, began to falter, it was Ilara who cleaned and dressed the wound using the herbs he'd taught her about, who forced water down his throat, and who kept vigil through a long, anxious night. They were no longer just a fugitive and her reluctant protector, they were partners, bound by shared hardship and a growing, unspoken understanding. The signs were subtle at first: a disturbed patch of ground where a larger party of riders had passed, a recently doused campfire, too large for a lone trapper. Then, one afternoon, as they crested a low ridge, Silas pulled Shadow to an abrupt halt, his body tensing. Ilara followed his gaze. Far below, moving across the valley floor like a dark stain, was a column of riders, at least a dozen strong. Even from this distance, the man at their head rode with an unmistakable, arrogant authority. "Thorn," Silas said, his voice a low growl. "And he's got trackers with him." "Apaches, by the look of it." "Damn good ones." Ilara's stomach churned. They were exposed, silhouetted against the skyline. Before she could speak, Silas was already urging his horse back down the ridge, seeking cover in a shallow depression screened by thorny acacia. "They haven't seen us." "Not yet. But they're cutting off the direct route to the pass." The pass was their intended gateway to the more rugged, mountainous territory where Silas hoped to lose their pursuers for good. Now, it seemed, Thorn had anticipated them. A new kind of fear, colder and sharper, gripped Ilara. This wasn't just about her anymore. Silas was now as much a target as she was. "What do we do?" she whispered, her hand instinctively going to the revolver tucked into her belt. Silas scanned the terrain, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "We can't outrun them on open ground, not with that many. And they'll pick up our trail soon enough." He pointed towards a maze of jagged, volcanic rock formations to the west. "That's our best bet. The Devil's Teeth. It'll be hard going, maybe lose a horse. But it's confusion in there. Narrow passages, blind canyons. We might be able to shake them, or at least pick them off if they follow too close." It sounded desperate, a gamble against terrible odds. But looking at Silas's grimly determined face, she knew it was their only chance. The ensuing hours were a blur of frantic riding, Shadow and Scout scrambling over treacherous scree slopes, navigating passages so narrow their stirrups scraped against the rock walls. Ilara's arms ached, her legs burned, but she clung on, trusting Silas's lead. Twice, they heard the faint sounds of their pursuers, a distant shout, the clatter of a dislodged stone. Each time, Silas found a new path, a deeper shadow, pushing them onward. As dusk began to settle, casting long, eerie shadows that writhed and danced, they found themselves in a tight, box canyon. A dead end. Ilara's heart sank. Silas dismounted, his rifle in hand, his expression unreadable. "They'll bottle us up in here come morning." He looked at Ilara, a strange intensity in his eyes. "Thorn knows these lands almost as well as I do. He's expecting us to be trapped then." A grim smile touched his lips. "But he doesn't know you're with me." He gestured to a narrow fissure in the canyon wall, almost invisible in the gloom. "This leads up. It's a climb, not a ride. You'll have to go alone. Take the ledger, the water, and what food you can carry. Head due north. After about 5 miles, you'll hit a dry riverbed. Follow it upstream. It'll lead you to a place called Whisper Creek. Ask for a woman named Martha. Tell her Silas Kane sent you." Ilara stared at him, horrified. "What about you?" "You can't fight them all." "I'm not planning to fight them all," he said, his voice calm. "Just delay them. Create a diversion. Make them think we're both still here." He unstrapped his saddlebags, pulling out a few sticks of dynamite and some fuse, relics, perhaps, from a mining past. "They want the ledger, and they want you. If they think they have you cornered, they'll be less cautious." "No," Ilara protested, her voice shaking. "I won't leave you." Silas gripped her arm, his fingers biting into her flesh. "Listen to me, Ilara. This is the only way. You get that ledger to someone who can use it against Thorn. That's what matters. My fight with Thorn, it's an old one. This is your chance. Don't waste it." His gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "You're stronger than you think. You'll make it." He pressed the revolver back into her hand. "Go." Now tears streamed down Ilara's face, but she saw the unyielding resolve in his eyes. He was offering her not just a chance at escape, but a sacrifice. The cowboy who had done the opposite of killing her was now willing to lay down his life, or at least risk it terribly, for her. With a choked sob, she nodded, gathered the meager supplies, and squeezed through the narrow fissure, the rough rock tearing at her clothes. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The sound of his quiet preparations, the clink of metal on stone, followed her into the darkness like a mournful farewell. The climb was brutal, a desperate scramble up a near-vertical chimney of rock, her fingers raw and bleeding, her lungs burning. Each upward movement was fueled by a frantic urgency, by the image of Silas Kane, alone, preparing to face a dozen armed men. When she finally emerged onto a narrow, windswept ledge, the canyon below was lost in shadow, but she could hear the faint, chilling sounds of Thorn's posse entering its mouth. A horse whinnied, a man shouted orders. Elara forced herself to turn away, to follow Silas's instructions. Due north. The moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, offered little illumination. She stumbled, fell, picked herself up, driven by a will she hadn't known she possessed. The weight of the ledger in her bodice was a constant reminder of what was at stake, not just her life, but Silas's sacrifice, and the hope of justice for Redemption Creek. Hours later, just as the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky in bruised purples and greys, a tremendous explosion ripped through the silent desert, echoing off the distant mesas. Then another, and another, followed by the sporadic crackle of gunfire. Elara froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Silas! He'd sprung his trap. She imagined the chaos, the confusion, Thorn's men caught unawares. Was Silas safe? Or was this the sound of his final, desperate stand? The urge to turn back, to race towards the sound of the fight, was overwhelming. But his words echoed in her mind. Don't waste it. She pressed on, tears blurring her vision, her grief a raw ache in her chest. The dry riverbed appeared as Silas had described, a pale scar winding through the desolate land. She followed it upstream, her feet leaden, her spirit teetering on the brink of despair. The sun climbed higher, beating down with merciless intensity. Just when she thought she could go no further, when the world began to swim before her eyes, she saw it, a thin plume of smoke rising from a cluster of cottonwood trees, a splash of impossible green in the parched landscape. Whisper Creek. It was a tiny, almost hidden settlement, a collection of adobe huts and a single, sturdier building that looked like a trading post. A woman, weathered and strong-featured, with kind eyes and hair the color of faded straw, emerged from the largest hut as Elara stumbled into the clearing. You look like you've seen hell and wrestled it to a draw, child, the woman said, her voice surprisingly gentle. I'm looking for Martha, Elara managed, her throat raw. Silas Kane sent me. The woman's expression softened with a hint of sadness. I'm Martha. And any friend of Silas is welcome here. Come inside. You look like you're about to collapse. Martha's small home was cool and dim, filled with the scent of herbs and baking bread. She helped Elara to a chair, brought her water, and listened patiently as Elara, choking back sobs, recounted her journey, the pursuit by Thorn, and Silas's desperate gamble in the devil's teeth. When she mentioned the explosions, Martha nodded slowly. Heard them. Figured it was Silas. He always did have a flair for the dramatic. When pushed into a corner she paused, her gaze distant. He's a good man, Silas Kane. Rough around the edges, carries a world of hurt. But good, down to the bone. Elara felt a fresh wave of grief. Is he? Will he be all right? Martha looked at her, her eyes filled with a wisdom born of hard years. Silas is a survivor. More than most. Thorn's men will be scattered, licking their wounds. He'll know how to disappear. But he won't come here, not if Thorn's still hunting you. It had put us all in danger. She took Elara's hand. You've done your part. You got here. Now, let's see about that ledger. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Elara felt a fragile sense of sanctuary. But it was a sanctuary haunted by the absence of the man who had made it possible, the cowboy who had defied all her expectations. The days at Whisper Creek passed in a haze of exhaustion and anxious waiting. Martha was a pragmatic, no-nonsense woman, but beneath her brusque exterior lay a deep well of compassion. She provided Ilara with clean clothes, nourishing food, and a safe place to rest and heal, both physically and emotionally. She asked few questions about the ledger initially, understanding Ilara's need for respite. The small community, a collection of outcasts and hardy settlers who had found refuge in this isolated oasis, treated Ilara with a cautious acceptance, their curiosity tempered by Martha's implicit protection. Ilara, however, found little peace. Her thoughts were constantly drawn back to the Devil's Teeth, to the sound of explosions and gunfire. Was Silas alive? Wounded? Captured? The uncertainty was a torment. She found herself scanning the horizon at dawn and dusk, hoping for a sign, a lone rider emerging from the shimmering heat haze. One evening, as they sat by Martha's hearth, Ilara finally pulled the oilskin-wrapped ledger from its hiding place. "This is it," she said, her voice quiet. "Proof of Thorne's crimes. Land grabs, extortion, stolen funds. It's all in here." Martha took the ledger, her expression grim as she carefully untied the packet. She wasn't a scholar, but she understood accounts, and the stark figures within painted a damning picture. "This is dynamite, child," she said after a long silence, her eyes glinting. More dangerous than anything Silas set off in those canyons. She looked at Ilara. "Thorne won't just be after you for this. He'll be after anyone who knows about it, anyone who might use it." The implication was clear. Whisper Creek was a sanctuary, but it wasn't impenetrable. "What should I do?" Ilara asked, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. "There's a circuit judge due in Presidio in a month's time," Martha said thoughtfully. "Judge Isaac Parker. They say he's a hard man, but fair. If you can get this ledger to him, and testify, Thorne's reign might finally be over." Presidio was 100 miles away, a dangerous journey through territory Thorne's influence still touched. The thought of venturing out alone, without Silas, was terrifying. Yet, the alternative, to let Silas's sacrifice be in vain, to allow Thorne to continue his tyranny, was unthinkable. It was at this moral crossroads that Ilara truly understood the change within herself. The frightened, desperate woman who had stumbled into Silas's camp was gone. In her place was someone tempered by hardship, someone who had faced death and found an unexpected ally, someone who now carried not just her own hope for survival, but the hope of justice for many. "I'll take it to Presidio," Ilara said, her voice firm. "I owe it to Silas. And to the people of Redemption Creek." Martha nodded, a look of approval in her eyes. "I thought you might say that. You won't go alone. A couple of our best men, Jed and Tom, they know the routes. They'll see you get there safely then." She smiled, a rare and genuine expression. "Silas Kane would be proud of you, Ilara Vance. He saw the steel in you, even when you couldn't see it yourself." Ilara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of gratitude and a renewed, fierce determination. She would not fail. She would see this through, for Silas, for herself, and for the future he had given her a chance to reclaim. The cowboy had not only saved her life, he had shown her how to live it. The journey to Presidio was fraught with tension, but Jed and Tom, the men Martha had assigned to escort Ilara, were as capable and discreet as Silas had been. They moved mostly at night, avoiding main trails, their knowledge of the backlands encyclopedic. Ilara, armed with the old revolver Silas had given her and a newfound resolve, proved to be a capable traveler, her senses sharpened by her earlier ordeal. She learned to listen to the silence of the desert, to read the subtle signs that warned of danger or promised water. Thoughts of Silas were her constant companions. She wondered if he was watching from some hidden vantage point, a guardian spirit of the wilderness. The hope that he was alive, that they might meet again, was a fragile ember she carefully tended in her heart. They reached Presidio, a bustling, dusty town teeming with miners, ranchers, and merchants, without incident. Judge Isaac Parker, a man whose stern visage and penetrating gaze lived up to his reputation, agreed to see Ilara after Martha's carefully worded letter, delivered by Jed, explained the urgency. In the makeshift courtroom, with Jed standing guard at the door, Ilara presented the ledger. Her voice, though initially trembling, grew stronger as she recounted Thorne's systematic corruption, her own unwitting involvement, and her eventual refusal to be his accomplice. She spoke of his threats, her flight, and the pursuit that had nearly cost her her life. She didn't mention Silas Kane by name, protecting his anonymity, but she spoke of an unnamed stranger who had shown her unexpected kindness and courage, a man who had risked everything to help her. Judge Parker listened intently, his fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. He examined the ledger page by page, his questions sharp and precise. When Elara had finished, a long silence filled the room. Finally, the judge looked up. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice gravelly, "if what this ledger contains and what you have testified to is true, Marshal Emmett Thorne is a disgrace to the badge he wears and a cancer on this territory." He paused. "I will issue a warrant for his immediate arrest and launch a full investigation. You will be placed under my protection until this matter is resolved." Relief, so potent it was almost painful, washed over Elara. It wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. Thorne would finally face justice. The next few days were a whirlwind. Federal marshals, dispatched by Judge Parker, rode out with warrants for Thorne and his known associates. News of the impending arrest spread like wildfire, shaking the foundations of Thorne's corrupt empire. Elara, housed in a safe location under guard, found herself preparing for what she knew would be the most difficult part, confronting Thorne himself, if he was brought to trial. The confrontation came sooner and more unexpectedly than she had imagined. Thorne, it turned out, was not a man to be taken easily. When the marshals cornered him in a saloon just outside Redemption Creek, he and his most loyal men decided to shoot their way out rather than surrender. A fierce gunfight erupted. News reached Presidio via telegraph. Marshal Emmett Thorne was dead, killed in the shootout, along with several of his deputies. Others were captured. The reign of terror was definitively over. Elara felt a complex wave of emotions, relief, certainly, but also a strange emptiness. There would be no trial, no public reckoning for Thorne in the way she had envisioned. Yet, justice, in its own brutal way, had been served. The threat was gone. She was, finally, truly free. The dust began to settle, both literally and figuratively, over the lands that Thorne had once terrorized. With the ledger as evidence and Elara's continued testimony, Judge Parker's investigation unraveled the full extent of the corruption, leading to further arrests and the slow, arduous process of restitution for those who had been cheated and oppressed. Elara found herself a reluctant hero in Redemption Creek, the townsfolk slowly realizing the truth of her actions and the injustice she had suffered. Offers were made for her to reclaim her old position, even to take on a more significant role in rebuilding the community. But Redemption Creek, for all its newfound hope, felt like a chapter of her life that was now closed. Her gaze, and her heart, kept turning towards the vast, untamed wilderness that had nearly claimed her, but had also, paradoxically, saved her. There was no word from Silas Kane. Martha, when Elara sent word via a trusted messenger, replied that Whisper Creek remained quiet, with no sign of him. The uncertainty gnawed at Elara, a persistent ache amidst her newfound freedom. Had he survived the explosions and the ensuing manhunt? Or had he simply vanished back into the solitude he seemed to crave, his task completed? One crisp autumn morning, as Elara stood on the outskirts of Presidio, watching the sunrise paint the distant mountains in hues of rose and gold, a lone rider approached. He was not Silas. This man was older, a wiry prospector leading a pack mule. He stopped, squinting at her. "You Elara Vance?" he asked. When she nodded, he rummaged in his saddlebag and produced a small, crudely carved wooden bird, its form surprisingly delicate. "Fella I met up in the High Lonesome asked me to give this to you, if I ever passed through Presidio. Said you'd know who it was from Elara's breath court." She took the bird, her fingers tracing its smooth, worn surface. It was a desert finch, the kind Silas had once pointed out to her, remarking on its resilience in the harshest of environments. There was no note, no message beyond the bird itself. But it was enough. It was a sign. He was alive. He remembered her. He had chosen not to return to her world, perhaps knowing that his own was too shadowed, too solitary. Or perhaps he trusted that she was now strong enough to forge her own path. Tears welled in Elara's eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound, bittersweet gratitude. The cowboy who she expected to kill her had done the exact opposite. He had given her back her life, her freedom, and a strength she never knew she possessed. He had taught her about survival, about trust, and about the quiet courage that could blossom even in the most desolate of circumstances. The ledger was now in the hands of justice. Her name was cleared. The future stretched before her, an open trail. Ilara stayed in Presidio for a few more weeks, helping Judge Parker's clerks organize the testimonies and evidence against Thorne's remaining cronies. The wooden Finch sat on the small table beside her cot, a constant, silent reminder of Silas Kane and the wild, untamed places that had forged their unlikely bond. She found she no longer yearned for the structured life of a town clerk. The vastness of the land, which had once seemed so terrifying, now called to her with a strange allure. It was a place of harsh beauty, of stark truths, a place where a person was measured by their resilience and their character, not by their station or their past. One morning, she made her decision. She purchased a sturdy mare, provisions, and a new rifle, her movements no longer hesitant but confident, purposeful. She left a letter for Judge Parker, thanking him for his justice and his protection, and another for Martha at Whisper Creek, filled with gratitude and a promise to visit one day. She rode out of Presidio not towards the settled lands of the east, but west, towards the rugged, open territory where Silas Kane had taught her to survive and to live. She didn't know if she would ever see him again. Perhaps their paths were meant to cross only once, a collision of fates that altered both their trajectories forever. But as she rode, the wind in her hair, the sun warm on her face, she carried his lessons with her, the importance of vigilance, the value of kindness in unexpected places, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The landscape that unfolded before her was no longer just a hostile wilderness, it was a place of possibility, of solitude that was not loneliness, of a profound connection to the raw, untamed heart of the world. She thought of Silas, hoping he was out there somewhere, under the same vast sky, perhaps carving another small bird, a silent message to the wind. Ilara Vance was no longer running from a shadowed past. She was riding towards an unknown future, her heart filled not with fear, but with a quiet courage and an unshakable hope. The cowboy had not killed her, he had, in every way that mattered, brought her to life. And as the silhouette of Presidio faded behind her, she spurred her mare onward, a lone figure moving with grace and determination into the embrace of the horizon, forever changed by the man who did the exact opposite of what she'd expected. The desert wind whispered around her, no longer a threat, but a companion on her journey.